Hello everyone and welcome. Tom Carlisle here, and we're going to go through the results of testing I've done with X-Plane 11.50 beta number 13 and NVIDIA driver that was released last week, which I think is 451.48. You see it there. That's what I'm running right now. There is a lot of speculation, and honestly it does at first glance look like a driver induced issue. Smells like one, tastes like one, therefore it probably is one. But that's really not where I'm leaning. I haven't been leaning in that direction all along, but after my testing I'm certainly not leaning in that direction. I'm not going to go through everything I've done. I'm going to show the results of that. First, in settings for X-Plane, I am overriding monitor technology. The reason I'm doing that is because I find that if I run X-Plane in G-Sync mode, the issue doesn't happen. So to replicate the issue, I'm forcing the monitor to fixed refresh mode. Actually, the driver and the monitor to fixed refresh mode. Preferred refresh rate, that probably doesn't need to be overridden, but I'm letting X-Plane control the refresh rate. This monitor, by the way, is a 75 hertz refresh rate monitor. Everything else is global settings, threaded optimization. I've turned on, but to be honest with you, I'm pretty sure that only affects OpenGL applications, and I've tested with this off and in auto as well, and it doesn't have an effect. And vertical sync, I'm turning it on at the driver level, and in X-Plane application, you'll see I do not have vertical sync or VSync checked in the application. There are many reasons for that. That is the way I prefer to run. If VSync is beneficial to whatever application, game, or simulator, I always want that being done at the driver level and not in-game. Now, in-game it might simply tick it on and still pass it to the driver to be doing the VSync. Probably that's what's happening. But especially when you have G-Sync, even though we're not running in G-Sync mode, to look at this problem, the vertical sync that you get when you turn VSync on at the driver level, it knows that you're running in G-Sync mode, and it gives you a version of the VSync algorithm which is specifically optimized for use with G-Sync. I honestly don't know, and I don't really have any way to validate if you're running G-Sync and you have vertical sync off at the driver level, but in game you tick VSync on. Which version of the VSync are you getting? The VSync that is optimized for G-Sync? Don't know. So that's why I try to do the VSync at the driver level. That's it for settings. Let's open X-Plane. Now I have stripped out of my X-Plane installation right now all the plugins except those that ship with X-Plane. I'm pretty sure all of these do. In any event, if I put back all my plugins, which are the typical ones, Aviator's Tablet, Better Pushback, Fly with Lua, none of those have an effect on the issue. But in order to demonstrate it and submit this as a bug to Laminar Research and save them time, so that no one has to wonder, is it actually a plugin that's causing this? The answer is no. I also have in my scenery, I haven't removed all the directories, but I have disabled everything that doesn't come with X-Plane. Again, I find that even if I have my sceneries enabled, that doesn't have any bearing on the issue either. But again, in order to demonstrate the issue and pass it to Laminar to really look at this, save them time, they don't have to wonder, well, maybe it's his third-party scenery, which is valid. Alright, so I'm going to resume the last flight. And this is going to spawn us in the default Cessna 172, not a modified version, and on a runway at an airport in my home region, Monmouth Executive, which is airport code KBLM. You don't have to use that airport to replicate this issue. That pretty much any airport you pick, you're going to see the issue. So what are we looking at now? There's very little scenery, right? Well, as I look left and right, I don't know if you can kind of see that jump, so I know without even moving the aircraft, the problem is there. And as we start rolling, you can see it. That jitter about every second. There's a stutter, followed by kind of a fast-forward catch-up after the stutter, which some call rubber banding, and I would agree with that terminology. Except in the context of gaming, rubber banding doesn't always mean latency, video latency. A lot of the times the game maker puts rubber banding into their AI. That's a whole different kind of rubber banding. But what we're looking at here, yeah, I would say calling it rubber banding would be a fair term to use. So you saw the driver I'm running and the settings. Look at this. Texture quality is all the way down. I've got anisotropic filtering all the way down. Number of world objects way down. Reflection way down. I've even told it not to draw parked aircraft. But I have visual effects on high, because as we all know, if you can't fly with this setting at least on high, if you try to fly at night, you're going to find a lot of the lights don't work. So if your rig isn't capable of at least putting this on high, I'd have to say honestly it's not a rig that's fit for X-Plane use. But you'll see anti-aliasing is cranked pretty far. So the reason I did that is I want to demonstrate. Up in the upper left corner, I've got the frame output displayed, and you see the frame rate, and you see it's fluctuating, which is part of the problem. Actually, it's part of the symptoms of the problem. We'll get to that in a minute. But importantly, you can see CPU and GPU time are both extraordinarily low, and the frame time is extremely low. So it's not that the issue is tied to the workload presented to the GPU or the CPU by the game. That's why I wanted to start with settings so low. But watch what happens. Let me get us rolling so you can see the problem. I was going to say, do we still have the problem? Yeah, we do. Reminds me of way back in the day on Commodore 64 with Flight Simulator 2. Because the primitive graphics, and I wish the graphics in Flight Simulator 2 on Commodore 64 was this great, but this delay. If you could get Flight Simulator 2 running this well on Commodore 64 so that your refresh rate was even this good, we were happy with that, right? Trying to find my mouse here. So, watch what happens if I move anti-aliasing down a notch. It's still there. I expected it to be. And we'll move it down another notch. And this is where I'm going to predict. Nope, it didn't go away. Anyway, we get this down enough. It's making an absolute liar out of me right now. It has made a big fat liar out of me. Well, as they say, ain't that the you-know-what? Alright, let me put things where... Well, let me put this on high. Because that's where I usually fly when I'm replicating this problem. No, I don't. If I want the problem to be present, I fly with it there. That's off, that's off. Well, through all my testing, I've had this here. Shouldn't matter. Oh. I told you I have VSync ticked off in the game. But I didn't actually have VSync ticked off in the game, and that's why we're seeing different behavior than I saw throughout my test process. So let me put it all back. We had anti-aliasing, I think, was all the way up here. And we see the problem. And if I back off anti-aliasing, it's going to go away eventually. Let me back it off another notch. See, it's gone now. We can see smooth, fluid rendering. And we no longer see this fluctuating so far. Remember earlier, I should have pointed it out, but it's okay. We're going to induce it again. It's fluctuating right around 74, 75. And that's because I have VSync on at the driver level, right? And that's what VSync really does, is it limits the frame rate so that it equals the monitor refresh rate. And I told you earlier, this is a 75 hertz monitor. So that makes sense. But if we put this back up a notch, we get the problem. And notice CPU and GPU, the workloads and the time it's taking for each to do its part rendering the frame, yeah, it's a little bit lower on the CPU. But watch this. So you do this testing and you might say, oh, so it's a bug. If SSA is 4x or higher, there's the problem. But no, it's not that simple. Watch, if I put that up a notch and bring AA down a notch, we still have the problem. So it's not that the issue is tied to AA. Gone. It's not that the issue is tied to HDR because I back anti-aliasing down slightly and I go back to maximum. Still smooth. So it's really not, it's not tied. And trust me, through all my testing I had anisotropic filtering at the default, which is in the middle. Unfortunately, you have to reboot X-Plane if you make a change to the anisotropic filtering setting. But I wanted to do this video with it completely down at 1x, so that it isn't likely a factor. World objects. This will force a reload, but it won't take long because I don't have any scenery other than the default scenery. Shouldn't take too long. But what I want to demonstrate here is it's not actually tied to the 3D complexity of the scene being rendered. Because we just saw that scene with nothing but a runway and some very low resolution textured grass. And now we've got some trees. We've got a little bit more detail in the world. It's still smooth. But if I see, we changed that, but you may recall if I put anti-aliasing here, induces the problem. So regardless of the complexity of the world, if I get a combination of visual effects and anti-aliasing above a certain threshold, and it's not one of them, those two settings, that drives the problem, and likewise with reflection detail, we'll go ahead and put it pretty high. You might say, well, we're not near water, so that's not having an effect, but there's reflections as we look around the cockpit and whatnot, and probably the glass. And we're in the broken state. Or are we? Yep. Yep. See, about every second. So with that advanced a little bit, well, now I have to back one of these off. And woohoo, I'm smooth again. So that's what I mean when I say that the problem really isn't tied to any one setting. It's a combination of really these three. And I found an isotropic filtering setting doesn't make one bit of difference. That took a long time to validate since you have to restart X-Plane every time you make a change to that setting. But let me put that there, leave that there. Let me put this here and this here. These are the settings I would typically fly with. I'm sorry. Well, except for texture settings. When I fly the Cessna. And you might say, well, what about texture quality? I've had texture quality low all this time so that we can see that the problem isn't really tied to the texture quality. And I just increased it, and we have to wait. You'll see the trees are fleshing out and things are getting more detailed. Even the cockpit, right? A lot of the stuff was just blurred. Incidentally, when you change texture complexity, that game engines and simulator in this case do tend to load textures kind of on the side in parallel as you move, right? It's got to pull the textures in from the resource files on disk. CPU's got to pass them to the GPU. In any event, though, bottom line is it's not heavily tied to the textures. We'll see that when I bump it up just one more notch. See, the cars are jumping, and if you look at that, you can see the problem is back. And if I back texture quality, the problem is still there. So it's really not related to texture quality settings. Therefore, you can conclude it's probably not rooted in VRAM memory management. So what is it? Tell us, Tom. We're dying to know. Yeah, let me get to the point. We'll put this back where it was and put this here. Those that are paying close attention can guess we're not going to see the problem with these settings. If that's what you guessed, you're absolutely correct. Fluid, smooth. Frame rate is hovering right around the monitor refresh rate because I have VSync on at the driver level. CPU and GPU frame times are still extremely low, so we just know that it's not workload related. So what is it? Well, let's bump up one of these settings to the point that we're going to have the issue. And let's take a look at, drum roll please, the micro profiler. Yes, I know a lot of people play with this and try to figure out what it means and whatnot. Like anyone else, I can only guess. But, and this is not a huge discovery that we see this hitting max, and that kind of coincides with each time it jitters. And if we pause this, oh, thought there was a pause. Yep, there it is. And you take a look at this, you kind of can see, well, it's each one of these is a frame. That's oh no, not each one of these. Oh, I see what's going on. So this is a frame boundary. Oh, so this whole section is a frame. This whole section is that frame. But the interesting thing is, this graph up here does not coincide with these frame boundaries and what you see below. At least I don't think it does. Because, well, if you click on one of these, it highlights the things that were happening when whatever you're clicking on was being done. And already we can see the problem. But, well, and that's really what I did. Let me unpause this. So, I think I turned off. Oh no, it does take a second. The micro profiler takes some time. So I was looking at this, like many, and saying, what's causing this? And yeah, we see some red stuff flashing by, and if you pause it at the right time, you can kind of get an idea what that is. And I don't think it's red because it's necessarily a problem or a condition that shouldn't happen. I think it just happens to be red because that's what they picked. But what I see, every time the screen jitters, it does look like it's happening when the only thing on the screen are these top three. Let me pause it. That doesn't pause the game, it pauses the microprofiler. Well, this point where I've paused, I'm only seeing this one thing, which is app update. Let me try to catch it. Catch it when that entire three are there. Nope, that wasn't it. I missed. Well, I hit it earlier. You'll have to trust me. Play with it yourself when I say that those top three things that you can see each time it's in its stuttering state are app update, flit per frame, and Garmin. Now, I don't have access to the code, so I can only speculate what these are. I think appdate is simply when X-Plane updates the screen. I think flit per frame is flight models per frame, which you might recall is a setting on the general page. Flight models per frame. I think that this flit per frame that shows up in the microprofiler correlates to that. The other one is Garmin. So what I did next, trying to get us off the dirt, because the plane doesn't move when you're not on a proper surface. There we go. So I played around and I said, well, let's look at timers. Mode timers. Alright, this is easier to look at. Well, the top three, like I said, flit per frame, Garmin, and app update. This is telling us the stats. If you highlight it, you can see flit per frame is the timer name, and it's got average, min, and max. Look how the max gets so big. 222 milliseconds is a lot longer than the compute time can be if you're trying to render 75 frames per second. But look at the Garmin and the app update one. I think app update is just the main timer that is responsible for updating what you see on the screen. Probably passes it off to the Vulkan API and to the GPU to do the rendering. But what caught my eye is this Garmin. And the reason it caught my eye is if you change the time to infinite, now instead of giving us the average min and max each second, now it's kind of displaying it in real time. And here's the frame boundary. Why are flit per frame, Garmin, and app date longer than the frame boundary? And if those processes, which apparently need to be calculated every frame, I have to assume that because Laminar Research knows what they're doing, then it's okay, so is this it? And the answer is, I think, yes. Let me reduce settings a notch where the problem goes away. Oh, my bad. This is max time. This is average, call average, and average. This is still high because I think it keeps it. It's from the time you started micro profiling. So I changed the setting. Can I dump these? Ah. Exclusive time. Okay. Well, let's just go with it. We're not going to worry about this right now because it's showing these values because they're the max values, and that's left over from when we were in the glitched state. Let's look at this column, which I think represents right now. And we see the frame boundary is here. We see app update takes the whole frame boundary. I don't think that's a problem. That, like I said, I think app update is the thing that takes everything from all the pieces of the simulator and constructs the frame and passes it off. So this is not a problem. Flit per frame is low and Garmin is low when we're in the unglitched state. Now let's go to the glitched state, and we can do that by just cranking one of these up, right? This is not what I saw earlier. Let me look at it. So I'm looking at resource pool maintenance. Let's get us in the non-glitched state. About to run out of runway here, and we're off the ground. Okay, now I think we're going to see what I'm expecting. Let's put the glitch state back. So I'm thinking, is there a way to clear out these timers? Oh, I think that's what I wanted to not do. Yeah, I put infinite. Okay. So what that's doing now is I think, it's aggregating these counters across only a 10-second period. The default, I think, is 30. So you'll see the maxes will basically reset maybe every 60 microseconds. Anyway, if we put it low, that kind of gives us a little bit of a real-time, I think, view. Let me get us moving. Well, our frame rate is no longer hovering around 70 because I've got these things all turned up so high. And I think that's a factor affecting what we're seeing here. Because the frame rate will dip below 75 if the scene complexity and the time it takes to compute the scene pass it to the GPU and have the GPU render it. If your graphics settings are above a certain level, that's normal. What I want to see, I want to factor every other case where the frame rate drops so that I only see the numbers here coinciding with the visual glitch. Yep, and here we are. And here's what I think it is. I think it's this Garmin timer. Yeah, I think this one is kind of real time. Every time. No, it's not every time. I don't know. I thought I had it set earlier and I was seeing it clearly. But the Garmin timer every once in a while seems to consume more time than the frame. And just for the heck of it, let's change flight models per frame. So that flip per frame is consistently higher now. See, you can see that one. I can't point at it with the mouse because I move the mouse and that pop-up goes away, but see where it says frame time? You see that Garmin one get very high. Yeah, we're still not quite getting up into the 70s, 75. I think that's, it'll make the issue a lot clearer. Well, I still need the issue to be present though, don't I? Well, no, this kind of does tell the story. So I've reduced settings just to that point where we no longer see the glitching. And yeah, this is what I thought it was earlier and what I wanted to demonstrate. Look at how Garmin never peaks now. Yet if I put settings back in a neighborhood where we're going to see the glitch, which that didn't do it, but see how Garmin still consistently stays low and it never peaks to a significant amount. App update still, but like I said, I think it's kind of the final thing that takes all the work from all these other things, assembles that into a graphics call, and ushers that off to the GPU. So, app update, I'm not terribly concerned that that's here. Because as long as it's under the frame time, then it's all good. But if I change settings to induce the problem again, I was going to say, look at how much higher this Garmin thing spikes, but I didn't increase the graphics setting quite high enough, did I? Okay, now this Garmin thing is spiking again. And we're in the glitched state. Let's turn flight cycles per frame back to the default, or flight models per frame back to the default. And now we see that come down. I thought earlier we saw on here the frame. There we have it. That's what I was looking at early, and I said, by George, I think we've got it. Let me get us moving so that we can see the glitch. And for whatever reason, I find that you see the glitch most prominently out the side view. And this one right here is what I'm looking at. It seems to coincide with each time you see the delay. That one peaks kind of at the same beat as the glitch. And if I'm going to leave the view there. If we get our graphics settings under the threshold, no, it's still happening. But yeah, look here. You still yep, that's beaten to the same. Oh, that's why. Put that there. Or I could have put SSA down a notch. Demonstrated that earlier. It's not tied to any one of those graphics settings. Let me get us back on surface that we can move. And this is not a video about how to properly fly the Cessna. I'll guarantee you that, right? Slow us down so we don't run out of runway. So, side view, same side view, no glitch, and we don't see this Garmin timer peaking. We'll put settings up a notch. Boom, 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 boom. Well, pretty much. So the question becomes, what is this Garmin timer? We can't possibly know. Is it this? Tied to this, maybe? I thought, well, what if we turn avionics off, but it still pulses? And I thought, well, we'll try other aircraft. And, well, what I found, I thought, well, let's try one that doesn't even have a navigation system. And I thought, well, that timer shouldn't be there and we shouldn't have the problem. Because we definitely don't have a GNS 430 or 530 or 1000 in this aircraft, do we? If you look at the truck, even though we're not moving, I've never even thought about flying this aircraft, but look over here and you'll see the glitch, and you'll see it still coincides, and you might see this ground texture moving, but I investigated that earlier and it has nothing to do with anything. There, now you can see it. Boom, 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 boom. I do think it's tied to this Garmin timer. So I thought, well, I think any of these aircraft all have the Garmin. Do we have any that don't? Maybe the Z-boat has done some things that make it not happen. Sorry folks, this obviously is going to force a reload and it could be a long one. I usually use HW info to gain insight in the sensors mode. Now it's loaded to gain insight into the compute resource usage. Total CPU shouldn't be maxed. GPU core load, you really do want that to be maxed. If you find you can't set your graphics settings high enough to get your GPU core load up, then if you look over here, you'll probably see that your CPU is pushing hard and you've got a CPU bound system. Classic situation of CPU throttling the GPU. So we're in the Zibo, this same place, same settings. You saw me, I didn't change a thing. And we don't have, or do we have? Yeah, we do have it. But what we see are frame rates dragging down into the teens. So with everything down, and again, that's going to force a reload. So we see the GPU is working hard, CPU not so much. CPU peaked while we were loading, of course. Alright. So in the Zibo, with very little scenery and everything turned down, well, I guess I left textures up, didn't I? We can turn those down just for the sake of being complete. It does look like a Commodore 64 back in the day, doesn't it? And our Garmin timer just barely comes into play. Now with the Zibo, I can't get frame rates up to the monitor refresh rate like we did with the other aircraft. That's just not going to happen. But what I wanted to see is if I get the Zibo in a state where GPU and CPU are quite low, what does that Garmin thing look like? And we see very little. Oh. So there was a column here that I probably accidentally. So there's the current right now. It's still there, but it doesn't take up much time. And if we bump up settings, until we have the issue in the Zibo, which we don't, you can see, and keep an eye on this Garmin thing. Now we'll put anti-aliasing up quite a bit. We don't have the stutter. Our frame rate is coming down. I mean, that's bound to happen as you decrease or you increase graphics settings. But we don't get that pulsing stutter. Now we have. And if we look again, we've got this Garmin thing. Basically, the Garmin timer seems to be the critical path in the building of the frame. And when the Garmin timer consumes more time than is possible, that's what's causing this momentary glitch. Now, let me go back and I picked the Zibo because, well, it doesn't have the GNS 530, 430, or 1000, so maybe that's what that Garmin thing is, but maybe it has more to do with this, where you can have a physical Garmin device hooked up, and if you're running the Pro version, well, I don't have any of that. And if that is what this Garmin timer is tied to, then, well, why is it even here on a system that doesn't have that license or that device? Let's go back to the Cessna. And look down here. Do we still see Garmin kind of spiking? We do. And I was going to say, do we have the issue? And I was going to say, oh, this isn't what I expect, because we don't, but we do. Even though we weren't moving, I was watching the truck off in the distance. We are in the glitched state. And we knew that by looking at this and seeing that the Garmin timer is going way out of bounds. And all we did was change aircraft, right? And let's put it where it won't have the issue, which is, well, we'll try 1 tick. Now we're not going to see Garmin spiking. And if we look at the display, we see fluid. And if we increase that, now we have Garmin spiking. And now we have the glitch. Let's take anti-aliasing back down a notch. Smooth, fluid, Garmin not peaking. And let's move visual effects up 1, which I expect is gonna push it to the point where is Garmin spiking? Yes. Do we see the glitch? You can see by these cars moving. And now that we're moving, you see we have the glitch. So I'm convinced at this point that the glitch is tied to whatever is behind this timer that's labeled Garmin. Why, when graphics are beyond a certain point, but not beyond a point where it's truly beyond what the graphics card can do. Oh, and I knew I put HW info up for a reason. We're in the glitch state in the Cessna. We do see GPU core load is pretty high. And if we just go back one notch to where we're not glitching, Garmin isn't spiking over here. We're not seeing the glitching. GPU load came down a bit. It's not banging up on against 100% anymore. Should it take all of the GPU power that this GTX 1080 can muster up to render this not a cloud in the sky? Actually, I think, are we in Cav OK? Clear. Yeah, we were. So not a cloud in the sky. No trees, no buildings. Virtually nothing to render. So even though we're not glitching now, I have to wonder what about this scene is so consuming. And you just saw me change my view from this dashboard view. I want to look straight up into this blue sky. And the reason I do that is I would normally look at FPS, but knowing that I have VSync on, I know my FPS isn't going to go any higher than 75. But what I'm interested in seeing, what's my GPU load look like? Game engines, and in this case, X-Plane's engine, they're smart enough to not waste time rendering something that's not even in the view. So I do expect to see GPU load go down when I restrict the view, and it remains low when I look out the side. Interesting. It goes up a bit. Let me just look at the seat right here. It's down. Now it's almost 100. See, that comes down. I'm looking at nothing but this door frame. And it comes down. Looking at nothing but that seat. It stays down. my seat. My door panel. So see how it's low there? But when I get here, we see some GPU. But what's really happening? Oh, we were looking external. And look at that. It's projecting. Yeah, I expect the wing to project a shadow, but look what it's projecting. I don't know what that is. And just looking at the concrete, we've got 100% GPU utilization. The other side is the same, so that's probably not an issue. Yep, that comes down. I expect that to come down. We'll get a few of these gauges in view. Goes up as all of this stuff is rendered, and we have reflections and shadowing and shade, right? So I don't really see anything that's terribly concerning. The external view of the aircraft requires less rendering power, and that's to be expected. We don't have the 3D dashboard with all the instruments, so that kind of makes sense. But stay in this external view and get us moving. Confirm we're not in the glitch state yet, right? Which we knew, and we know by looking down here and not seeing Garmin spike. We expect to not be in the glitch state. Let's put ourselves in the glitch state by driving graphics up a little bit. Do we see Garmin fluctuating? We do. And although it's not as prominent in this external view, you do see it. It is happening. GPU utilization is back to 100. So, without being able to have access to the code or be able to hook graphics debuggers and NVIDIA tools up to the executable, I don't think it is given to us in a state that that can be done. Otherwise, people would exploit the heck out of that, reverse engineer it, steal their intellectual property. So no, I don't expect that's the case. But what I would wonder is, why do I see Garmin spiking every time I also observe the glitched state. And we're in the glitched state, and I'm going to leave us exactly in this same state. And remember earlier I said at the driver level for X-Plane 3D settings, I want to make it be in fixed refresh because the problem doesn't happen when you're in G-Sync mode. So let's look at that. Oh, and every time you change that, this changes. Remember, we had this to on. Because I said it's a best practice to have V-Sync on if you have G-Sync on. And we do. And I like to make sure the G-Sync indicator is displayed so that you can be sure you're truly seeing G-Sync mode has taken effect. And if we look at the upper right hand corner, we see normal. That's the G-Sync indicator for a Vulkan app. I think if it's a Direct 3D app, you get a nicer indicator. I don't care about that. And resume last flight. As it loads and then puts us in the aircraft view, I expect that upper right hand corner will say G-Sync in green. And we're going to load in at the same airport, same aircraft, and with the same graphics settings we had just moments ago. Will we have the glitch? And we don't have G-Sync up here like I expect. So honestly, I do expect we will. Developer, microprofiler, go to timers, is Garmin peaking? And the answer is yes. And we do see the glitch. So I've seen this before. I look at those settings again. G-Sync is enabled for windowed and full screen. And for all things, but I had previously overridden it. So everything is as I expect. I did find on my system I have to run NVIDIA Inspector, and see, G-Sync application mode is in full screen and windowed just like we expected. But if I go to the X-Plane profile, it says full screen only. I want to set that also to full screen and windowed. Apply it. And now, see, oh yeah, we already have the G-Sync indicator in the upper right hand corner. I don't know if it's an X-Plane thing or an NVIDIA thing, but I did find that I can't really get X-Plane to launch in G-Sync mode unless I give it a little bit of a nudge with the NVIDIA Inspector. And no, I won't have to keep running NVIDIA Inspector and doing that every time. Now that I have it set, X-Plane will launch and consistently launch in G-Sync mode. But if I make any changes to the settings in NVIDIA Control Panel, then I have to do that again. Show Micro Profiler, we want to look at timers. We ended up having this at 10. Do we see Garmin spiking? You notice a minute ago when we booted in non-G-Sync mode, still have the graphics set the same place. Same aircraft, same location. We don't see Garmin peaking. And guess what? We don't have the glitch. And maybe it's that if I increase graphics settings ever so slightly, at some point the glitch will kick in. Because that's what we saw in non-G-Sync mode, isn't it? But we still don't really see Garmin spiking. And I'm now 2 graphics levels higher than what we saw induced this glitch in non-G-Sync mode. Let's go even higher. Oh, but I should point out, we see the frame rate is consistently now hovering around 30. Yeah, higher graphics settings, more workload for the rendering, frame rate is going to decrease, but it just simply decreases. It doesn't present with that glitch. Oh, except it does. Look. It's glitching. Yeah, that's another thing I noticed. In G-Sync mode, we get the glitch if X-Plane is not in the foreground, which it's not now. If you look at the display, you're going to see we're glitching, and you can see between these graphs is that Garmin thing still. Yep, it is. And you can see in the display we're glitching. So yet another case where as soon as the glitch is induced, Garmin is spiking. And when X-Plane is brought back to the foreground, interestingly, the glitch stops happening. And Garmin, once again, has stopped spiking. Let's move graphics even higher. Oh, I should have looked at GPU load. See, we had our GPU cranking full load, even when the settings were where they are. But no glitch. Yes, the frame rate is lower. I'd fly with a 30 frame rate per second in X-Plane, but we don't see Garmin spiking, do we? And if we crank this all the way, frame rate is down in the teens. Now you might think, but Tom, look, it's glitching. Is it really though? Because what we're really seeing is simply a frame rate that's in the teens. Other than that, it's not doing that glitch rubber banding effect. And interestingly, we don't see Garmin spiking. GPU cranking hard, we're going to increase it even more. We saw earlier that texture quality wasn't really a factor. Let's confirm still. Our frame rate was in the single digits and up into the teens before. It still is. But we're not glitching in the sense of having that pulsing severe drag, and we don't see Garmin spiking. Let's bring reflection detail also to a significant amount. Doesn't have a drastic effect on our frame rate. It's still down low. But it's not that same thing. And interestingly enough, we don't see Garmin spike. So the bottom line is, I'm convinced that what we have here put everything back to what I call normal. What we have here is, for whatever reason, well, to summarize, it's not that the graphics level can't exceed a certain amount and push the GPU hard, otherwise you get the bug, because we just did that and had the GPU cranking as hard as it possibly can. And although we saw low frame rates, we didn't see the issue. And we didn't see Garmin spiking. And although it took me some time to set it up and kind of get my mind around it, we've been able to show every time we have the issue present, we see Garmin spiking. And if we don't have the issue spiking, this Garmin timer never rises to a value that's anywhere near the actual current frame boundary. App update. Like I said, I think app update is just the thing that takes all of the work and marshals it over to the graphics engine to be rendered. And it follows the frame boundary as you would expect. So, for whatever reason, this Garmin timer, whatever it does seem to be very closely tied to this specific bug. And yes, I will grant you, if I were to load up driver 440 to 16 or whatever it was, then and do all of the stuff that I just did, yes, we would never see this specific issue. Now, from that, I personally don't draw the conclusion, therefore this is a driver bug, or a regression introduced because of this driver. I might come to that conclusion if through 3 days of a lot of time and effort put into trying to find what circumstances do produce this and what artifacts we can get that might give some insight within the X-plane stack where that issue is coming from. And I am convinced and fairly confident that whatever this Garmin timer is, for whatever reason, it malfunctions with the new driver. Maybe the code was not quite doing whatever it does in accordance with the best practices, but if code seems to work, right, you go with it, unless you have reason to believe. You know, I mean, development time is not infinite, and as much as one wants to spend, you want every line of code you write, you want that to be a textbook example of best practices. And best practices are always evolving, so you always want to be current on what the best practices are. That's just a little bit unrealistic, though. Everybody doesn't know everything about everything. And no matter how hard you try, you can't do it, and nor would I expect any developer or even team of developers to be able to do. So if I was the development manager, seeing what I'm seeing here, I would urge the team to go look at this Garmin timer, figure out what it is, why it's there, and is there any reason that it should be spiking under the circumstances that we've seen today. And I'm fairly confident that at the end of that exercise they'd come back and say, gee, we did find a problem and we fixed it. And honestly, we look at it really hard and we can't figure out why it never broke on any driver before this one. Seriously, that's what I honestly think is going to happen here. So I made this nice long video and I was very long-winded, but I showed a lot. Bottom line, I would urge Laminar Research to look at this Garmin timer, see what might be going haywire. Of course, I demonstrated that it also is not present when you have X-plane in G-Sync mode on G-Sync compatible hardware. At least that's the case on my system. I can't say if that's going to be the case on every system under the sun, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is. So to troubleshoot this, debug it, make sure you're not in G-Sync mode, or if you are in G-Sync mode, notice that when the app goes to the background, the bug will come into play. Well, it's not right now, is it? Probably because my settings are within the parameters, yep, that I know doesn't trigger the bug. Now I'm within the parameters that I know from all my testing to expect the bug, except it's not here. But the reason for that is we're in G-Sync mode, and in G-Sync mode you don't see the bug unless X-plane is in the background. So yeah, this video is probably a lot longer than it needs to be. I probably should edit it down, but I'm not going to. But I might go through and annotate the points that are most important. And with that, I I think I'm going to shut this down. I'm going to write up these findings. I'm going to do a bug report and attach a summary of my findings to a bug report to Laminar. I'm going to post this on YouTube so that they can refer to it. And hopefully at the end of the day, the result will be that perhaps just Sid will see this, look at it, and say, by golly, it does look like maybe there's something going haywire with this Garmin timer. Let's see what that might be. And it might take him all of about 15 minutes. And I may be wrong. It wouldn't be the first time. But it also wouldn't surprise me if I turn out to be somewhat right. And that was my intent, actually, is to help determine the circumstances that one can expect to see this glitch and be able to use tools. And the microprofiler within X-Plane is a great addition. I hope that whoever had the idea of putting that into the product is being well taken care of, because that was a smart move, and making it accessible to us as beta testers was absolutely the right move. And I thank you for that, and truly I hope that this is helpful in squashing one bug, which seems to be affecting a lot of people's systems. And a lot of people are saying, well, we got to roll back to the old driver because this is a driver problem. Well, again, I would say, based on what I see, it does look like there's probably something that can be fixed in X-Plane. Probably not a driver bug. Is the new driver one of the many circumstances that have to come together to make this particular issue present? Probably. But that doesn't mean it's a bug in the driver. And before we go, I would just want to caution folks. I mean, honestly, I know the xplane.org forums is a culture where they like to, how do I say this? They like to get to the bottom of something, and then for the next 12 years, that shouldn't change. What I mean is, if someone back in 2014 discovered, hey, if you install X-Plane to your program files directory, that's a problem. And here we are 6-8 years later, and still the general rule of thumb around those forums is you have to install X-Plane to your desktop folder, or a folder that's under your full control. And if you challenge that thinking, because in 2020 it is not a good practice to install applications to your desktop folder, someone will quickly drag up that thread and post it and say, this has been discussed and here's the bottom line. But you can actually install X-Plane to program files or anywhere, as long as you give the person who's running it full control. It'll work fine, no problems. Well, why did I get into that? It's just the culture on the xplane.org forums tends to be very, very like that. And what I think would likely happen with this issue is someone would say, well, you just can't run this driver, so everybody's got to roll back. But I don't think it's a driver problem, and I really, really, really avoid trying to get into this situation where you can't update your video driver. It's a bad place to be. And when you think you're in that place, you may think you're done and you've solved the problem, but you really haven't. because now you've got a system that you can't update the video driver, otherwise you'll break X-Plane. And the main problems that come along with that are if you're a gamer and you play other games, if you can't upgrade your video driver beyond version 442 dot whatever, when the newest AAA release comes, just picking one out of thin air, Cyber 2077, right? Cyberpunk 2077. When that releases, you'll probably see an NVIDIA Game Ready driver release maybe 2 days before. And if you look at the release notes, you'll find that it's got optimizations and fixes some things that are specific to that title. And if you want that new game and you can't run the new Game Ready driver, there's a very good chance you're going to have some problems with that new game. That's one reason why I caution people not to get into that mode of saying, well, I can't update my video driver because game X won't work if I do. Of course, if your X-Plane rig is dedicated only to X-Plane, that's not such a concern. But will you really be getting top performance out of the very expensive video card you bought if a year from now you're still running this 442 driver? The answer is probably not. The other reason that I hate the idea of not updating a video driver is because of the security threatscape. The bad guys are always looking for ways to get into your system, to exploit your system, to gain access to your system. The GPU driver is a very, very hot target. And for good reason. You pretty much know everybody's running either an NVIDIA or an AMD GPU. Well, I guess some will be running the Intel HD because it's built into their CPU. So if you can figure out how to exploit the drivers, those 3 drivers, then you just figured out how to gain unauthorized access to pretty much every Windows system in every home or on every desk across every country across the entire world. The GPU runs with Ring 0 privileges. The operating system absolutely trusts it. So if you can breach a video driver, if you're a bad guy, that is worth a lot of money. If you have a day 0, you've developed a day 0 exploit that if you run this or fake someone into clicking this by sending them an email or a text or finding some way to trick them into clicking this link and installing this application, it'll break into their GPU driver, hook a backdoor, and now you have access. That is extremely valuable to the professional criminals that develop malware. So, do you really want to have your GPU driver be locked down at version 442 and not update it? I would say, yeah, do that if you really don't care. But, and maybe if your rig truly is dedicated to nothing but X-Plane, and I mean you do nothing but fly X-Plane on it, you do not use a web browser on that rig to log into anything that is sensitive or could do you harm if it was compromised. If you can say that you don't do that with the same system that you're flying X-Plane, then I might be able to be convinced that it's a good idea for you to lock down your driver. Otherwise, I think it's a horrible, horrible idea. And I don't think that as a culture of flight simulation enthusiasts and or gamers that we should be viewing that as anything except a really, really bad practice. And we shouldn't be recommending it. We shouldn't be putting it in people's heads that it's okay, or recommending to people who are less experienced than us, oh yeah, you want to fix that problem, just roll back your driver to 442 or whatever. That is not something we should be doing. Alright, enough about that. I want to thank anyone who watched this whole thing, listened to me ramble on and on. Again, Garmin timer within X-Plane, please look at it. I've shown specifically how you can replicate the problem and show that consistently when the problem is being replicated, you can see that Garmin timer is taking longer than the frame time can allow, and hence that is causing X-Plane to have that jitter. And I hope it's helpful, not just to Laminar Research, but my colleagues in the forums. And thank you, and I'm going to sign out and wish you a good day.